Welcome to the world of Rex. It's Mr. Marvel Rex here with you to talk about the lunar eclipse, the first eclipse of 2024 for the week of March 25th to the 31st. We start the week off Monday with an eclipse. So this is bada boom, bada bing, bada bang. This is huge. Wow. We're going to get into it. Before we dive into this very dynamic, important week to pay attention to, you can book a reading with me one-on-one. That's Libra, is one-on-one. With the link in the show notes, you can find a very easy way to work with me one-on-one, especially if you have any relationship drama coming up, because, oh, it looks likely. I will say that. There's going to be some big dynamic relationship changes happening during this time. So, working with me one-on-one to help just understand the energies and how it's specifically falling in your chart can be extremely helpful. So I recommend that. You can also check me out on TikTok and Instagram. The links are in the show notes, and the weekly newsletter is amazing. I love my editor, Redika. I love you. She makes it all happen. So check out the newsletter. You can subscribe to it. And yeah, that's what we got going on before we dive into this really, really dynamic week. So let's check it out. The Monday starts off with and the first eclipse, the first big eclipse happening March 25th, Monday at midnight Pacific Standard Time. So you adjust for your time zones. For the folks on the East Coast, it is perfecting at 3 a.m. and it's happening at 5 degrees of Libra and 7 minutes. So also, if you know where 5 degrees of Libra falls in your chart, this is very important. It is getting eclipsed. So what that means is that there is a reboot. I like to think of an eclipse, especially a lunar eclipse, as like a defibrillator to the heart. So there's like a moment where the heartbeat leaves and then, oh, okay, I'm breathing again. So there is a moment where everything is shut down to then be woken back up. And that reboot is always a little intense. I mean, a little or a lot, depending on where 5 degrees of Libra falls in your chart. In the sign of Libra, it's all about one-on-one dynamics with another person, you and another person. It has a particularly legal bent to it, so we can expect in the collective a lot of legal stuff coming up. We're gonna hear a lot about courts and laws and, dare I say, the Supreme Court. We will see a lot of legality in the news because Libra does rule the scales of justice. So that's a lot. There's gonna be a lot about that coming up. It is less dramatic than the eclipse coming up in 2 weeks on April 8th. So this is a slightly less dramatic eclipse, but it's still an eclipse. We're going to call this a super moon on steroids. Like this is a full moon on steroids. This is not a joke, but it's not as overall paradigm shattering as the April 8th eclipse that we have coming up. So hold on to your horses. It does begin the eclipse, what I like to call the belly of the dragon. However, this is very, very different than what we've seen the last in 2023. So this is weird. 2024 has got a whole different vibe to it, and it's like reversed. So we need to pay attention. Last year, we had an eclipse that was in April, we had a solar eclipse on April 20th that opened up, and it was a solar eclipse as a new moon, not a full moon. It's a new moon, new beginnings, and it was the mouth of the dragon. We were entering into the mouth of the dragon. If you're like, Marvel, why are you talking about a dragon? In Vedic astrology, the north and south node, which is how eclipses happen, they happen on the nodal axis. The north and south node are associated with the head. The north node is the head, and the south node is the tail of the dragon in Vedic astrology, Indian astrology. Very powerful predictive technologies coming out of Indian or Vedic astrology. So a solar eclipse on April 20th of last year opened up the mouth of the dragon, and we went inside, and there was a new beginning, and it was like, wow. And then March 5th, or May 5th rather, we got pooped out in the pooper of the dragon. Like we left the dragon's tail on May 5th of 2023. And then again in October, we entered a very nasty mouth of a dragon on October 14th, and it was kind of like south node. So the dragon hadn't brushed its teeth when we entered its mouth on October 14th, and then we were again expelled on, it would have been October 28th. We were expelled from the tail of the dragon. Now this year is different. This year is different. Both eclipse seasons, one of them is happening now, starting on March 25th. The other one is starting late September of 2024. They both start with a lunar total eclipse. So, what that means, not total, but a lunar eclipse, which means that we are entering in through the tail of the dragon and then going through the tail backwards out of the mouth. Now, this is very interesting. I'm going to play with the metaphor here. And this is not taken from Vedic astrology. This is just me playing with the metaphor of the dragon. So, take it as you'd like. If we're entering in through the tail, it basic both times this year, it basically means that the fated changes that are happening start out with a loss or start out with having to kind of go through a narrow place that we don't really want to be in. So the way I look at this eclipse season, very simply, is that with the South Node in Libra, with this eclipse starting in Libra, and then 2 weeks later we have an eclipse in Aries, we have to let go of a relationship to start a brand new life. Very simply, I'm reducing it to the most simplistic phrase here, which is Libra, relationship, Aries, hero's journey. So we're releasing some kind of codependent relationship or relationship dynamic, and 2 weeks later, we're being initiated into a brand new journey that's a lot more aligned with who we actually are. That's the Aries point, and Chiron in Aries is asking us to heal our individuality and be more authentic. So we're entering into the tail of the dragon, and then we get shot out on April 8th through the mouth. And the fire is like coming out with, like, we are being shot out with fire. And so there's something very spiritual about this where I'm like, oh, there's a lot of, first off, it's abnormal. It's sort of reversed. It doesn't really make sense. It's opposite of the metabolism, like the process of metabolizing something. Instead, it's like we're going through a narrow place that can feel really dank and gross. Like, let's just be real about it. And then 2 weeks later, we're thrown out with the fire, but we're shooting out almost like a rocket. I do imagine it a little bit like a rocket because at the tail of the rocket is fire. So we're sort of being shot out in this way that is very dynamic and moving very quickly and exciting. There's not a loss associated with April 8th. I mean, oof, on the collective level, we're going to see some stuff. But on a personal level, it's like, oh my God, 2 weeks ago on March 25th, I let that thing go. And now there's so much more momentum as I shoot out of the mouth of the dragon. I hope y'all can follow me on that. It feels very spiritual to me because often spiritual initiations involve going through a sort of purification, and purification, fire is a purifying force. So there's an element here where April 8th, that eclipse that we're going to have 2 weeks from now, is sort of initiatory, purifying. We feel like we're a different person. A lot of people can feel like they've unlocked a bigger part of their personality or a more real part of themselves, and there's just a lot more wind in their sails. This moment, Monday, there is no wind in the sails. This moment is sort of like, okay, wow, we have to let some weight off the ship because otherwise the ship is going to sink. Or we have to, if you're going through, let's use the analogy of the narrow place, I have to let go of some of the baggage I'm carrying to make it through this narrow, corridor. So there's a sloughing off. There's a sloughing off and a releasing that starts very dynamically on Monday. I will say, though, if you are an empath or a highly sensitive person, or you're ruled by the moon, if you're a Cancer or a Cancer rising, Cancer moon, you have been feeling this energy for at least 10 days. If not the last couple days, like definitely it's been at least, 3 to 10 days. You've been feeling this energy. And Monday just kicks it off. I don't love that it's happening on a Monday because in late capitalism, everyone's working. So when there's an eclipse while everyone's in the grind, it can feel very discombobulating. So I think for a lot of people, this might have to do with business partnerships and business related relationships. So something needs to be released. Okay. And it has to do with intense fated endings, resolutions, and the closing of a chapter wherever 5 degrees of Libra is in your chart. Also, if you are like, I don't care about the degrees, Marvel, then it's about relationships, just very clearly. So we need to be releasing codependent dynamics right now. I talked about that last week with the ingress of the sun into Aries. And what do we actually consider healthy relating and how it affects our process of being ourselves? So we need to make improvements during this time in terms of how we relate to others. I really want everyone to ask themselves this question. Am I a good partner? Like, am I a team player? Like I think about those Ironman competitions. This is very Aries, where like people are working to like go through the mud slides, and they're like running miles, and then they're like climbing up the ropes, and then the Ironman competitions where everyone's being really strong and athletic. There's many variations of them. Not everyone has to be like a bodybuilder. Some of them are for like totally normal people, right? And I think about the way that you play it is that it's a team. Like there's a group of people that make up your Iron Man team. And like if one of your friends is like maybe less athletically inclined as you are, how are you to that person? Like, do you shame them? Are you picking them up when they fall? Do you know how to ask to be picked up when you fall? These are really good questions during this time. Like, am I a good partner? Are there ways where I can actually do better? Are there certain things about how I relate to others that I absolutely know is not good for me? This eclipse is going to force you. That's how eclipses work. They're a forceful energy. They're actually, in Vedic astrology, they're considered malefic, aka nasty, nasty. Like they will come in and rip things out of your life because they're not in balance. And Libra is obsessed with balance. So there can be a lot around polarities at this time. You can become extra sensitive this whole week and leading up to this Monday. You can be really obsessed with polarity, and what I mean by that is, oh, this is out of balance. And there can be a fixation and an intensity of like, this is really out of balance. Now, interestingly, Pluto is in a beautiful trine to this eclipse. So there's a lot more support here than we're going to get with the Aries eclipse on April 8th. There's more support here. And so Pluto, in a positive aspect to the moon, says like we're gonna transform this experimentally. We're gonna try something new. And so, especially if you're open to trying something new or out of your comfort zone, you can work with this energy and release some of the forcefulness of the nodes more gracefully. You can be like, oh, this isn't so much of like my arm is being pulled or like right twisted, but why don't we just be experimental with this and see how this works in terms of balancing out some polarities that are happening, right? Maybe there's a relationship where you feel like you have no power in it. Why don't you inject something experimental into the dynamic? Try something new. So there's an element too about thinking on your feet during this period of time, trying new things. Things will probably feel like they're happening very quickly. It is very emotional and it is very much about relationships with the full moon and an eclipse in Libra. Some folks, especially if you are an Aries or if you have very strong fire in your chart, you may feel extra confrontational during this time. Could be defensive, could be just like, feeling, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of fire in the sky at this time and a lot of air. So there's a lot of thoughts and communication that's going to be happening as well. It can feel a little bit like an overload. I'm looking at this energy, and from an intuitive level, I'm just feeling like we have to face the elephant in the room with our relationships. However, that's going to be probably pretty intense because it's an eclipse, very emotional. So, how can you create rules and boundaries going in? Okay, like this is coming to a head. And most of us probably know what relationship or relationships are coming to a head right now. We're all I really believe we're all geniuses. I really believe that we're all intuitively right on the money. When I do readings with one-on-one clients, like y'all know, I'm telling you, I'm reflecting for you what I see, but y'all are almost always in it and know what's happening. And so you probably know the person or the polarity that needs to be balanced out and needs to be transfigured and changed. So go in with a game plan. What are rules that you can set for yourself first that allow this situation to have more of a container? How can you communicate transparently and with bravery and courage so that the other person knows your boundaries and your game plan? Like, hey, if this happens, I'm going to take a 20-minute break, or if this goes down, let's reconvene in 2 days, etc. Like having rules, physical rules that you have follow through on will be very helpful during this time. Uh, the Libra moon, and I have a Libra moon, look, very diplomatic, very interested in equality and being fair-minded. I love my Libra moon because clients can tell me literally anything. I mean, clients have told me all sorts of stuff. And like, apart from I've got some strong Pluto and Scorpio, but like the Scorpio and the Libra is like, okay, yeah, let's work with it. Like, I'm not going to judge you for that. I'm really open, and I'm really open to seeing both sides of a story and not just getting fixated on like, oh, that person did that. That's really bad. It's more of like, okay, that's why the justice system is ruled by Libra. Okay, this thing happened. Why don't we get a group of people together to see what the verdict is? And so someone with a Libra moon, this is a full moon in Libra, the way to work is to be like, oh, I'm really looking at all sides of it. It's a little bit of a devil's advocate. How can we see the other person's side? And how can we have a sort of diplomatic approach, trying to make sure that everyone gets their needs met? There will still be conflict regardless. I'm just like, there's going to be conflict. But if we can enter in with some diplomacy and looking at it from all the angles, it's going to help a lot. And it also just involves slowing down while we do this. You can't rush through a trial. The great analogy for Libra is like a criminal trial. Someone did something wrong, and there's a group of people and lawyers that are looking at it. And you don't rush a trial. You definitely don't rush a criminal trial. So we need to think about it that in our own lives. If you feel like someone has committed a crime in your life in some way, just remember it takes time for the legal system to work. I think it takes too long a lot of the time. We all know that, but it still does take time, and it requires time to parse out all the details and look at it from all the sides and hear both sides of the argument. So really, like, let's just take that in for a second. Hearing both sides of the argument. If you are only willing to listen to one, this moon is going to burn you. This moon will burn. This eclipse is going to hurt. So it'll be intense regardless, but I think that there's a graceful way to work with it, and we have to channel the exalted version of Libra, which is the open mind, the scales of justice, but the open-minded like juror who's like, okay, I want to hear all sides. Let's figure this out. I was just listening to the Gottman Institute, very Libran Institute. I was listening to one of they're on TikTok or Instagram. I think it's just Gottman Institute. I recommend following them because the South Node's in Libra right now. Please go follow the Gottman Institute on Instagram so you can just like watch their reels. And they talk a lot about, the moment that their partner says these words, which is, we need to talk, it can be it usually that phrase freaks people out, right? We need to talk. And they say in this reel recently, they're like, when I hear that phrase, we need to talk, I pull out my notebook and my pen immediately. And I'm just like, cool. What do you got to say? And they take notes and write down what the partner's saying. It's just a practical, like, okay, all right, I'm uncomfortable, but I'm going to write down everything you say so that I really can hear it. And one other thing that the Gottmans say is, as they're writing the notes, if they get really triggered by what the other person's saying, they ask and slow down the conversation. They ask like, "Can you explain that really fully? Because I'm getting just letting the person know, oh, I'm getting really kind of animated. I'm feeling it in my body. Can you slow down so that I really understand this part? Because it is a lot for me." Or like, "Oh, I'm not fully aware of what this means yet." So asking for time and space is beautiful in this process of like, oh, I really don't know. When we're in fight or flight, our brain kind of shuts down and jumps to the easiest conclusion and is usually a judgment. So if someone presents you with something this week that you're like, I don't like that, or that makes me feel really unsafe, and you immediately jump to a conclusion, that's where we're tripping up. We want to slow down and really try to be like the Gottmans, they are geniuses when it comes to, they've been in a marriage. The Gottmans have been married for 36 years, right? And they like love each other. So these two are professionals, and we want to listen to them while this Libra energy is in place, because they can help us really upgrade our relationships that allow us to have a new beginning in 2 weeks that isn't a bridge that got burned down. I would rather have everybody listening to this look back in 2 weeks and be like, wow, I handled that in a new and experimental way that allowed me to hear the other person more and allowed me to speak more truthfully about where I was coming from too. And now I feel liberated on that April 8th eclipse 2 weeks later, rather than looking back and being like, I think about, I don't know, I've just been watching Lord of the Rings, but I think about like Mordor, and when Sauron falls, like everything just gets burnt up, like his whole army gets decimated and it's all on fire. And I just don't want that for people. And really Sauron, if we're going to go into the metaphor here, I won't stay here too long, but if we're going to go into the metaphor of Sauron for the Lord of the Rings, he's leading from a place of lust for power and control, which is the shadow of Pluto, and not from a place of like love, which is where the Fellowship of the Ring is coming from. They're coming from a place of love. And so we need to approach this full moon. Venus is the sun, is the ruler of Libra, and Venus is love and heart chakra, loving another person. We need to approach this week from a Venus perspective, from a loving perspective. Again, it begins with ourselves, but it needs to be extended. The olive branch needs to be extended to other people. However, because it's an eclipse, it's going to feel really difficult to sit with our feelings at this time. We're going to have to express them. How do we do that in a nonviolent way? So I'm going to link in the show notes the Gottman Institute. I'm also going to link nonviolent communication. You don't need to be blaming your partner at this time. It's not going to help. It's just not going to help. Whether it's a business partner or a lover, really learning how to take radical accountability for what you're feeling and where you're coming from, rather than being like, you did this to me, you did this to me, you did this to me. That's the opposite of what needs to happen during this eclipse. Eclipses are these hyper potent portals where the universe is looking at all of us very clearly and scrutinizing us and saying, are you going to evolve through this? Or are you going to like cling on to what was comfortable, and it's no longer in alignment with the age of air that we've entered with Pluto? Pluto being in a close trine is like, are you ready to step into the new reality? Because it involves a lot more personal maturity. It involves a lot more authenticity and sharing, right? Like, this is a question for all of us: is are we ready to evolve through this lunation? You also may see things in your relationships right around this time that you hadn't seen for the first, couple months of the year. Or you can all this eclipse, by the way, is completely tied in with the October 14th eclipse. So there can be big revelatory changes on a collective and personal level in regards to whatever was happening in our lives on October 14th. Obviously, we had very big world events happen during this time. So definitely we're going to be looking at those world events and seeing how they're changing in a massive way on March 25th, and what was going on for you in October, because there's a turning point here happening and it's very clear. And you're seeing something, the full moon illuminates something that's faded, karmic, and has to change. It's not like optional, that it's not change optional. It's okay. And this is finally coming to some sort of resolution. There's an ending that's going to lead to a new beginning in 2 weeks. You want to pay attention to the next 2 weeks. I want to be actually really clear. Monday can feel very intense, especially if you're ruled by the moon. So Cancers are going to feel this, or Leos ruled by the sun. Um, but for the rest of us, it could take a few days and even up to 2 weeks to really have the revelation. An eclipse is a revelation. Like, oh, okay, that relationship, I got it. Or you've maybe been in many relationships that have had a similar theme, and on this during this time period, you can click into place, oh, that's some trauma that I had that creates this relationship style or relationship pattern over and over. It can be a hard pill to swallow in this period of time, but ultimately it's liberating, and the energy is getting rebooted again on April 8th. So just remember that. If it feels impossible during this moment in relationships, it can feel very much like, how is this going to get better? This feels really intense. There is an absolute rebirth April 8th. So just keep that in mind, that the it is not over, but it definitely is going to feel intense between March 25th and April 8th. Often there's a crisis of consciousness during this time. And I just want to put that out there, that relationships are going to be affected by this crisis of consciousness. They can either be challenged, broken, or strengthened during this time. And of course, we have more than one relationship in our life. So we'll see this play out with a few people, definitely. So wow. Oh my gosh. I mean, there's other things happening this week, but I really just wanted to focus on this full moon. This is really the most important thing to look at. Um, I really think that if we did anything this week, March 25th, it would be to start even Sunday. I think this drops on Sundays. So if you're listening to this on Sunday, good for you. I would start with a relationship audit and really look at like, okay, where does my nervous system feel stable in relationships, and what are other relationships where I feel really agitated? Look at the agitated relationships and really think, okay, what needs to change there, and get ahead of the curve. You can get ahead of the energy a little bit. Um, if you feel like there is some kind of lack of clarity, or there's something that maybe is hidden in a relationship, addressing the elephant in the room is what I really want to say here. And just being logical about it, bringing your pen and paper and writing things down, being able to sit in uncomfortability is going to be really key. And one thing that I can share that I know works because I literally practice it physically, meditation. Sitting down and meditating for 10 minutes a day allows you to sit through uncomfortable processes a lot more easily. Like the fact that I meditate, when I get into a conversation or a dynamic that feels very charged, I can feel it. It's like I have some sort of like flexibility, like psychic flexibility where I'm like, yeah, because it's uncomfortable to meditate. It is like we all know this. A lot of us resist meditating because it's uncomfortable. But when you put yourself in an uncomfortable situation 10, 12 minutes a day, then when you're in one with another person, you have a little bit more flexibility, you have a little bit more strength. It's like you worked out your meditation muscle and you're like, all right, oof, okay. Like I have more psychic space for this. I can sit and listen more. And your nervous system's already more calm because you regularly meditate. There's a lot of benefits here with meditation. And just being able to sit with your own emotions. Like, do you sit with your own emotions? I very much am aware that because we're technologically inundated, most of us don't know how to sit with our own emotions. When something awkward happens or intense happens, we tend to go to the phone immediately. And this full moon and the planets don't really care about our phones. Guess what? They don't. So this full moon in Libra is like the most important thing is to actually see what's really going on here for you internally, and then also in the part, it's going to be mirrored in the partnership. There's very much a mirroring energy with Libra. This is a wonderful time to talk to a therapist deeply. Some of you may have therapist breakups at this time, like no joke. You're gonna maybe be like, this isn't, but it can lead to a new therapist, which is lovely. It's with an eclipse, anything that happens during this time is fated, Fated. It's supposed to happen. So if a relationship falls away during this time, breathe into it. Breathe in, do not overreact, and do not try, please, everybody, do not try to control or bring that relationship back into your life over the next 2 weeks. The biggest piece of advice I have is let go and let God when it comes to people being eclipsed out. Eclipse means to remove. So if somebody disappears or like ghosts in any way, shape, or form, you listen to this podcast or you sent this to a friend who needs to hear this. This is not the moment to try to take reign over someone else's storyline. This is actually a time to take reign over your storyline. I am going to look at my storyline and I'm going to bring myself back into balance. It might not feel easy, especially at the top of the week, but over the next 2 weeks, the goal is to balance out the polarities in our relationships, usually by directly addressing things head on from a vulnerable way. One of my pro tips, and I've said this to a few of my clients, one of my pro tips when you're having a hard conversation or initiating a hard conversation with somebody, lead from your vulnerability. Do not lead from a place of defensiveness. What do I mean? Let's say that you who is listening, let's say that you did something that really hurt my feelings, but you might not be aware that it hurt my feelings, right? I could come to you and say, hey, that thing that you do really like that thing, I don't like it. I think you should stop. I think you should do this, this, and this instead. And I'm telling you how to live your life. So I'm like not talking about I'm not really talking about myself. I'm really trying to control you, right? If I come to you and say like, oh, I've been having a really hard time, like I've actually had a hard time sleeping because this thing happened. And I'm assuming you didn't really know that it was affecting me, but it is affecting me. And I just want you to know that this is really hard. I start there and then I go, what do you think about how we can move forward here together? Like the other person often is like, oh, I didn't even know that that thing was hurting you, or I didn't even know like that I did that. So often there's just a lack of consciousness. We live in this like we live in this like deprived attention economy where everyone's just always focusing on 18 million things. A lot of the time people don't even know that their behavior is harming another person. But coming from a place of vulnerability and showing them your cards immediately is powerful because it's not a blame mechanism. It's this thing happened and I've experienced it and it caused this feeling inside of me and like I hesitated to share it with you because I didn't want to make you uncomfortable, but I need you to know, like, if we're going to be in a relationship, this thing's really hard for me. Can we figure out something that's different? Like, what does that look like? Coming from a place of solution, a solution oriented approach is very powerful here. But leading with your vulnerability and leading with your heart it often disarms people immediately because it's like they can't argue with the fact that you're not able to sleep over the thing, or they can't, or people can't argue with you about your feelings. They shouldn't. And if they are, they have a lot of emotional maturity, a lot of emotional maturation that needs to happen if they're arguing with your emotions. That's called gaslighting. So that's the definition of gaslighting is when someone's like, you're not feeling that. That's when we need to slow down and be like, okay, this person is on a healing journey, and maybe I need to create different boundaries around them, right? I maybe need to interact with them very differently. So, yeah, that is the full moon in Libra, the eclipse. We need to be looking at where our life feels out of balance, particularly in relationships and our relationship to the legal system as part of it, the contracts that we have with people. This is psychic, spiritual, emotional contracts, as well as business contracts. So a lot of that's up on the table. Again, whatever happens is fated, Fated. So be on the ride. We're entering the tail of the dragon. We're going through the narrow place. We're there for 2 weeks, and then we're going to get shot out with a lot of fire and gusto on April 8th. So there's going to be a big reboot on April 8th. It can feel like a period of mourning, 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 not like good morning, but well, good morning. Good morning, good morning, where we're releasing and grieving. So there can be a sense of releasing relationship dynamics or even nostalgia with how we used to do relationships because this literally is about reformatting our relationship style. So a lot of us will have to just accept, oh, okay, I can't do this anymore with my partner, or I can't do this anymore with my business partner. Again, it depends on where Libra falls in your chart. You can book a reading with me to go way deep into how this eclipse is going to impact you. If you do have planets around 5 degrees of the cardinal signs, that's 5 degrees Libra, Aries, Cancer, and Capricorn, please book a reading or just like look and see where that is because you're getting a major impact from this eclipse. There's a big change point for you, and it's alchemical and it's transfigurative. And it's all in alignment with Pluto and Aquarius. So this is all about us being able to enter the new paradigm, and therefore our relationships have to adjust to this new paradigm as well. That's part of the bigger yoking that's happening here with this lunation. All right. I love each and every one of you. Thank you for listening to the World of Rex. There are resources in the show notes. I highly recommend that you look at them to get forewarned and forearmed for this week, to be prepared. And I'll talk to you next week. As always, signing off from the World of Rex.